Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. To start off, I've never been a firm believer in anything paranormal. After this, I can no doubt believe in things that cannot be explained. And this is my bone-chilling experience. The experience happened in 2020 during the pandemic. As everyone knows, the world shut down and everyone and everything was on lockdown. As for me, I got a lot of time to practice what I love, and that was baseball. I live in Montana, close to Glacier National Park. I was 17 at the time, and to put it into perspective, I am 6'4", and have a pretty good build, but I'm a gentle giant, and I get paranoid easily. I know, right? Big guy that gets scared easily. My family has a huge backyard, 78 acres of dense forest, and in those acres, there's a shooting range, some ATV trails, and a small creek. So I am no stranger to being outside and exploring the woods. One afternoon, I'd say 4-ish, I'm out riding my ATV on one of our made trails. I saw something dart from the corner of my eye as I turned a bend. I slowed the ATV down and looked in the direction that I saw the movement. Then I noticed the only sound I heard was the ATV. Me being a curious fellow, turned the ATV off and listened, as it was dead silent. I swear the forest was on mute, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps crunching leaves and sticks. These were slow, heavy footsteps, but it was purposely trying to be quiet. No later than 5 seconds after I turned the ATV off, the footsteps stopped. And growing up outdoors and in the woods, when it goes dead silent, not even the bugs are heard, it means something is on the prowl. My mind starts racing, and I realize there is a predator around here somewhere, and I need to leave because we have bear in this area. We have seen plenty of bear on the property, and I was in no mood of dealing with one. Right as I was about to turn the key on the ATV and start it up, I heard a singular tongue click sound as if it was whatever it was trying to get my attention. Hell no, I muttered, turned the key and sped out of there as fast as the ATV could go. Sadly, this is the beginning of the experience. I sped home, ran straight inside, and told my mom who was cooking dinner. She paused and looked at me with the most confused look ever. I knew she didn't believe me, but I asked, what could it have been? Because there is no way a bear could make a tongue-clicking sound and walk on what sounded like 2 feet. My mom just brushed it off and said, maybe you're imagining, or maybe it was your exhaust popping from your ATV. Yeah, I guess, I said, even though I knew it was not an exhaust pop. A few days go by and I forgot about this whole thing. A couple weeks go by without any issues until one day I'm outside with my German Shepherd Rusty playing ball with him. It was maybe dusk. I'd hit a ball into the woods and he'd go fetch it, bringing it back. On one of these hits, he runs for the ball and just stops dead in his tracks, staring into the woods. His ears are twitching. I'm confused at his sudden behavior, so I call his name maybe 4 times. He doesn't budge. He just stands there staring at something in the woods. Then, here's where shit hits the fan. He suddenly backs up slowly and starts growling and baring his teeth, snarling and going berserk. Rusty's a family dog and has been with us for many years, and not once has he ever acted like this. My mind's panicking because I'm like, oh man, he pissed off a bear. So I start running over to him, making loud noises to see if I could scare off this bear or whatever. And that's when it jumps out. I was about 30 feet from Rusty at this point, and dumbfounded. This creature was like another German Shepherd, but double Rusty's size, dark brown, had the head of a German Shepherd, blood-red eyes glaring at me, human-like hands with claws at the end. This thing stood 6 feet tall at least. I noticed that it was extremely skinny, as if it was malnourished. I instantly knew from listening to stories and watching TV shows about the paranormal that this was a Dogman. It completely turned its attention from Rusty to me and starts growling at me, slowly creeping toward me. My heart hit rock bottom. My whole body went blank. My instincts screamed at me, run. Suddenly, I had the biggest adrenaline boost ever, but I was not about to let my dog get absolutely shredded to pieces. I've heard the damage that these things can do to deer and other animals, and that was not happening to my dog. Then it charged at me, snarling. It covered 15 feet in 2 steps. This thing had such rage and hatred. Then, out of pure adrenaline, I just swung my metal bat, still in my hands, as hard as I could, and connected with its head. Let me tell you, when I hit that Dogman or werewolf thing in the face, I knew I racked up something in its head. It was a loud clunk as it staggered backward, almost falling over. Then Rusty attacked and bit its arm. It let out a howl. It smacked Rusty, sending him flying maybe 10 feet in the opposite direction. Seeing Rusty on the ground, I had another adrenaline boost, this time filled with anger also, and I again swung this metal bat, this time with a noticeable dent in it again at its face, connecting. This time there was another clink and a small crack. I looked at its face and noticed that its jaw was crooked. I believe I broke this thing's jaw. It got knocked to the side and tried to snarl at me again, but this time a weird sound came out of its mouth. Best way to describe it, sounded like a drunken growl. It even seemed surprised that it sounded different. It kind of paused and had a humanoid look of confusion on its face, shook its head, realizing the damage. Then its blood-red eyes stared right into my soul, and I saw the rage only build inside of it. I knew the bat was no match. I raised it up again and swung, but, thank the heavens above, there was a gunshot and the beast was hit with a .30 caliber round from my dad's custom hunting rifle. I snapped my head back toward the house to see my mom with a rifle in her hands, aiming another round as she screams, "Get back," as she unloads another round, this time hitting it in the leg. It howls a painful, forced howl as it turns and tries running back into the forest. I sprint over to Rusty and pick up this huge dog and sprint back to the house, my mom scanning the tree line and backing up to the house. We go inside and lock all the doors and windows as she runs up to me and hugs me, praising the Lord, saying she saw the whole thing, and ran and grabbed my dad's rifle out of the gun safe and ran outside just in time to shoot. I examined Rusty while my mom was watching the tree line. Rusty had nothing major, a cut on his shoulder, and that was about it. My mom called the police and told them everything about what happened when they arrived. I broke down, letting all my emotions flow freely, and, to our surprise, they said they've had calls about a weird, tall, skinny dog that has been running around the town lately. We called my dad and explained the whole thing. He left work early. We then stayed at a relative's place for a while and ended up selling that house, which was honestly really sad, but probably the right thing to do. We moved closer to town because of our experience. I am now positive that things exist that we do not understand. And everyone, please be careful if you live next to the woods. Something in there are not bears and will not hesitate to end you. Today's second encounter. This will be told through my brother's perspective. My brother is a United States Forest Service smoke jumper. These guys and gals jump out of airplanes to fight wildfires in some of the most rugged and isolated forests in the country. For privacy's sake, I will not share his name or any of the particulars which may identify his outfit. Thus, I will not be able to share the exact location, but it happened in Northern California. 0500, we are called out to California to fight an emerging fire that had been ignited by a lightning storm. 0520, airborne. 0600, we circle the target, throw a couple of streamers, and the first jumper exits the aircraft. 0610, I exit the aircraft, deploying my chute, and begin my final descent. 0615, successful landing, pack my parachute, and spot the next jumper, my partner. This fire had jumped up the canyon very quickly due to high winds, which drew it up through the draw. At this point, the fire was 20 to 30 acres and 0% contained. The new wind patterns threatened to double the acreage within minutes. We were digging fire breaks in an attempt to redirect the flames. It was around this time that my jump partner signaled for me to come and take a look at something. I approached his position and immediately smelled a dead animal burning. Sad though it is, this is not uncommon. I met my partner and he pointed up the tree. I looked up and saw a large smoldering mass. Due to the size, I thought it was a bear, but when I looked through my binoculars, I could see that this creature had hands and legs with feet. At this point, I knew that it was a Sasquatch, even though I had never seen one before. It was the only thing that would match the description of what we were seeing. The tree in question was in the canyon the fire had jumped, and we figured the Sasquatch had been trying to escape the fire by running up the canyon and had climbed the tree once the fire jumped. We called it in, and we were instructed to evacuate the area. As we were leaving, I could hear something crashing through the brush before us. In a matter of seconds, a second Sasquatch emerged from the trees. It came to a stop 40 yards in front of us, looking right at me, and let out this god-awful scream. Its eyes were full of rage, and I was definitely in fear for my life at that point. The plane carrying a fire retardant flew overhead and deployed its load, which distracted the Squatch. It took one last look at us before pivoting and continuing crashing through the brush to our right away from the fire. The entire encounter lasted 20 seconds, but we figured that the two Squatches were mates or friends and had been caught off guard by the changing wind patterns. It appeared that the second Sasquatch had escaped the canyon and then had looped back down to try to find its mate, only to discover them dead in a tree with the two of us in close proximity. As per the physical description, I would say this thing was 7 to 8 feet tall and very muscular, reminiscent of a gorilla. Its fur was a light brown with the exception of its face, which did not appear to have any hair. Its nose was flat and wrinkled, and its mouth was open, revealing teeth also similar to that of a gorilla or a baboon. We were debriefed by a high-ranking Forest Service official, and he looked us dead in the eyes and said, "You boys saw a bear." I refrained from sharing this experience because 1, I knew no one would believe me. 2, I was scared that if this got out, I would be jeopardizing my good standing with the Forest Service. For this reason, I decided to share with anonymity, and with full knowledge that people still probably won't believe it. But these creatures are out there, and they are affected by these wildfires as well. Thank you for letting me share. Today's third encounter. This takes place on my grandparents' property up in the Colorado mountains, a couple of hours outside of Denver. My grandparents lived in a decent-sized cabin in the smack-dab middle of the woods. They have about 168 acres of forest they own. I was 19 at the time and decided to go hunting since deer were in season, and I was honestly really excited to go hunting. It was around 9 in the morning, and after breakfast of pancakes and eggs, I packed a small backpack and told my parents and grandparents I was going out to see if I could bag a deer. They said okay and let me on my way. To give some info, I'm maybe 6 foot, 180. So I'm by no means a small guy. I took about 30 minutes to walk to my tree stand as I was trying to be quiet. It was freezing out. Maybe 10 degrees with the wind chill. I arrived at my stand and took the ladder up and sat in my tree stand. I was in a very good spot because I was high enough to see around me, and I was partially covered by leaves and branches. I started to give calls and make noises, and at around 2 hours, 3 doe came running out of the trees to my right into my shooting lane. I, unfortunately, was not going for does, but I was a little morale booster because it meant deer were around, and I was absolutely freezing my ass off in the stand. After watching the doe for a bit, they disappeared off in another direction, and again I'm alone. I waited for another hour to see if anything else would come, but nothing did. So I opened my backpack and pulled a couple of granola bars out with some trail mix and water. I finished my snack, sipped some water, and in the middle of my drinking my water, a big 8-point buck came trotting through the trees. To be honest, I almost choked on my water. This was the biggest buck I had ever seen, and it was right in my shooting lane. And it was broadside, which was perfect. It was about 50-ish yards out. My heart was racing. I was so excited I was carrying my personal .308 Winchester, which my dad bought me a year before I turned 18. I steadied my aim and took a breath as I looked through and adjusted the scope and saw this darn thing kick into gear and sprint into the trees. Damn it, I muttered under my breath because I was genuinely pretty pissed. What the hell scared it off, I wondered. I looked around with the scope and glanced to the left, and that's when I saw it about 30 feet to the left. I honestly can't believe I didn't pass out. There was a set of large, amber-colored eyes staring into my soul through my scope. My gut dropped as I saw this thing emerge from the forest and come into view. Standing on 2 legs, there it was, jet black. The head looked like a German shepherd, and its ears are pointed up. This thing was huge, maybe 7-8 feet tall. It was muscular, but not like a bodybuilder, but more like a professional track runner. Its legs were skinny and dog-like. It was very defined, and its arms were lanky but ended in claws. Then I saw its lips curl back, showing me its canines snarling. I wanted to leave, I wanted to get out of here, but I couldn't stop looking at it. It was fixated on me, and I was fixated on it. I was cold, and my blood felt like ice coursing through. I was shaking, my thoughts ran through my mind, and I realized my .308 would probably not do me any good. This thing would shred me to bits. As if my mind and soul were not shattered enough already, this thing started slowly walking toward my stand. It got about 25 feet away, just staring at me. Words cannot describe the fear nor terror I was feeling at that point. It gave me a "you're lucky you didn't shoot that deer, you'd be next" look. It then growled this really low, grumbly, loud growl. The best I can describe it is an alligator, but longer, not as throaty, and like a dog doing it. I was sweating so bad, my heart was pounding so hard, I thought I was going to explode. Then it gave out this kind of snort, turned around with a swift motion, got onto all fours and ran in the direction of the buck. I sat there for 30 minutes watching and waiting because there was no way I was getting down from the stand right after watching it run off. I finally got enough courage and sprinted home as fast as I could. I told my parents and they didn't believe me. My grandparents, on the other hand, pulled me aside after and said they had seen it too. They haven't seen it in a couple years, but they knew it was out there. I've been back several times and never saw it again, nor do I want to. I think to myself as being insanely lucky, and that day it was hungry for that deer, not me. A warning for those who go out into the woods. There are some things in those woods that cannot be tamed, so please stay alert and be careful. Today's fourth encounter. This experience happened back in mid-October of 2016. Me and a friend were out deer hunting along the ridges of North Hector, Arkansas. We had several cattle deaths before the sighting, but we had mainly chalked it up to coyote or coy dog roaming the property, as it was next to the Ozarks. This wasn't uncommon, as we expected livestock death during the fall due to the high amount of predators in the area. Me and my friend, who was more like a brother, Lee, had gotten out of our classes early, so we rode out to the ridge that we called T Hill to check my family's cattle and maybe hunt for some game that evening if we saw anything. Usually the cattle would be grazing and you could spot deer around the fence lines that touched the hardwood flats. Everything seemed normal except the cattle were not in their normal area out on top of the ridge. Instead, they were hiding in the lower thickets, watching a cow pace around one of the streams that trickled down the ridge. Now these streams were never over 6 to 7 inches deep, and that was only if we had a downpour. I kept the cow at bay while Lee drove his ATV a little closer to the stream before waving me over. In the stream was one of our young calves dead, but it wasn't mauled like it would have been if a coyote had killed it. We both shrugged it off. It must have gotten weak and drowned in the small stream. A few days later, we had a weekend off and went hunting along that ridge. Lee managed to harvest a good-sized deer. I went to go help him drag it out. This is whenever we saw it. It was grayish color, stood up from the bramble thicket in front of us and let out this low, deep rumble. Lee was maybe 5'10". I'm about 6 foot at the time, but this thing was at least a foot taller than me. Instantly, we both unsighted our rifles and fired at it. The beast stumbled as Lee's .306 and my .350 struck it. It screamed as we watched blood bubble from its chest and diaphragm. It didn't drop, and we knew we had to keep firing or we were going to end up being a meal. We fired again and again before this thing ran, screaming from the woods, for the woods, and off into the ridgeline. "We ain't tracking that damn thing," Lee said, as we finished dragging his deer up the trail and loaded it hastily on the ATV before peeling out of there. Shortly after we graduated, I left the area. We talked about the event several times after, but always chalked it up to being a bear that we had spooked. But I remember a canine face as it rose, and bear don't get to be 7 feet tall and skinny like that thing was. Today's fifth encounter. This took place fall of 2020 on the shores of Des Plaines River in Illinois. I'm an avid fisherman, and I try to get out whenever I can. On this particular day, my buddy Nick and I were fishing for evening bite, hoping to catch some fall sauger and a northern pike. As dusk approached, it got eerily quiet. The birds stopped singing, the crickets stopped chirping. It was silent. I found it strange and said, "Nick, did you hit the mute button or something?" In normal close friend fashion, he responded, "No, jackass, but now that you mention it, it did get quiet." It stayed that way for maybe 30 minutes until we heard what sounded like grunting coming from the opposite shoreline. My friend asked me, "What the hell was that sound?" And all I could honestly answer was, "I don't know, bro." Since it was across the water from us, we both kind of just shrugged it off and kept fishing. About an hour later, just as the sky is starting to get dark, we heard that grunting start up again, but a lot louder, like it was a lot closer. I will not lie, this definitely had my attention now. I started trying to see if I could see any movement in the woods, but I couldn't see anything. A tree across the water from us began shaking, like someone or something was shaking it back and forth. Being an outdoorsman, I remember that when deer are in rutting season, they'll sometimes rub off on trees. That would explain the grunts, too. I looked at Nick and said, "I think I know that it's Bambi's dad getting his freak on," to which Nick started laughing. Just then, the grunting stopped and was replaced by what I can only describe as a blood-curdling, extremely deep, extremely angry-sounding howl. I've heard coyote and wolves howl before, but the biggest of them could not make this sound. Nick and I looked at each other, both having this WTF look on our faces. I'm a decorated combat vet, so I do not scare easily, but I was definitely worried at this point. I'm a licensed concealed carry holder, so I naturally wanted to reach for my sidearm, but I didn't draw. 2 trees across the water from us started shaking violently. Another howl belted out. I drew my gun from the holster at that point. The thicker of the 2 shaking trees suddenly creaked, snapped, and came crashing down hard and fast. More than half the tree landed in the water, partially submerged. What was standing where the tree once was chilled me to my core. I've only seen something like it in Wisconsin 34 years ago. It was dark brown, gray in color, had pointed, longer ears, a thick mane, and an elongated snout. I'm a big guy, 250, 6'3", and even though it was 50 yards away, I felt small looking at this thing. I knew what it was immediately. Dogman. I don't know if it was hungry or if we were in its territory, but this thing seemed to have bad intentions in its mind. I told Nick, let's slowly pick up our gear as not to draw any attention to it. We were about halfway through gathering our stuff when it started running toward us, leapt in the air, and landed on the exposed tree in the river. It looked like it was trying to find a way across the river to us. Nick said, "Screw the gear, let's go." I paid way too much for my gear. If the Dogman wanted it, he or she was going to have to kill me. I raised my gun in the air and fired 3 shots, trying to scare it off. And to my amazement, it worked. We picked up our stuff and ran to the car and got the heck out of Dodge. Hopefully, the rest of my fishing trips will be Dogman free. Today's final experience. When I was younger, I was taught how to hunt and instantly fell in love. By the age of 13, I owned my own bow, a decent knife, and I was a pretty good shot. By the time deer season was coming around, my cousin and I were both excited for an upcoming hunting trip we had planned to southern Illinois. When we arrived at the hunting lodge, we unpacked our belongings and began prepping for the next day's hunt. We were going deep into a part of woods where big buck were caught on trail cam. Super excited, we went to bed early that night. The next morning, we grabbed our gear and headed to our stands. My uncle dropped me off 50 meters from my stand, wished me good luck, taking my cousin to their double stand. They would both be hunting maybe 1.5 miles from me. The hunt was uneventful up until the last few minutes of light. Fearing to miss out on a chance to shoot a deer before dark, I shot at a doe, a little out of my comfort range, but I was desperate as I launched the arrow out. It hit the deer, and it ran into the woods. I texted my cousin and uncle letting them know, so they came to help me track it. It was already well past dark. We had our flashlights as we followed the trail of blood, hopefully for a deer at the end. Eventually, we came to the dead end, where there was a large puddle of blood, then nothing, no sign at all. My uncle decided to go get some help from other family members, so he started up the trail to meet them, telling us to sit and wait. As we were sitting in the darkness at that last blood spot, we began to hear footsteps crunching, crunch here and a crunch there. Definitely getting closer. Our hearts started to began beating faster. I felt fear lift into my throat as I grabbed an arrow and nocked my bow. As my cousin drew his knife at his hip, we were both staring into the darkness. Then crunch from there to here, getting closer each time. Finally, we thought surely this was close enough. My cousin turned his flashlight on in the direction of the noise. Before the light could completely engulf the creature, we saw two yellow eyes reflecting the light, maybe 6.5, 7 feet off the ground, just to immerse itself back into the darkness. We both got a little closer, scared, not able to speak to each other, as we heard the crunch of this thing encircling us. Thinking this thing was surely going to attack us, we got ready for a fight. When, up the hill, we hear voices and can see lights, as my uncle and 2 other family members, all carrying guns, came and found us shaking, terrified. They only shrugged it off and asked where the last blood was. We told them we looked on for more blood or the deer and found nothing. My cousin and I, still afraid, would not leave our uncle's side. Eventually, giving up, we returned to the lodge, and we both decided we didn't want to go out hunting the next morning. I've hunted since and still love the woods, but I am always extra careful at night and always carry a firearm with me. I still don't know what it was, but I hope I never find out. And there you have it, folks. I hope you all enjoyed today's bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and honestly what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories, judgment-free. Everyone's simply treated with the respect that we all deserve, and that is because of all of you, so thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant. Keeping an eye on our children, our pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.